The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Ash Fork, Arizona Territory, and Margaret Monroe knew that the moment she stepped down, her entire life would change forever. Dust settled around the weathered wheels as she peered through the small window at the collection of ramshackle buildings that lined the single main street. The year was 1878, and Ash Fork looked exactly like she had imagined it would, rough and unforgiving under the harsh desert sun. Her heart hammered against her ribcage as she clutched the worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned in this world, including the letters from Gideon Ashworth, the rancher who had agreed to marry her sight unseen. The driver opened the door and extended a calloused hand to help her down. Margaret took a deep breath, smoothed her traveling dress, and stepped into her new life. The Arizona heat hit her immediately, so different from the humid warmth of St. Louis, where she had boarded the train 3 days ago. She scanned the small crowd gathered near the store, searching for a face that might match the description in Gideon's letters. Tall, he had written, with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident involving a stubborn horse. Miss Monroe. A deep voice spoke from behind her, and she turned quickly. The man standing before her was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and when he removed his hat, she could see the thin, white scar bisecting his left eyebrow just as he had described. But it was his eyes that caught her attention most, a striking gray-blue color that seemed to look right through her, searching for something. "Yes, I'm Margaret Monroe," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Ashworth." "Gideon, please," he said, and a slow smile spread across his sun-weathered face. "Welcome to Ash Fork. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long, but I've arrived safely," she replied, returning his smile despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. How would he react when he learned the truth? Would he send her back on the next stagecoach? Gideon retrieved her trunk from the back of the coach and loaded it onto his wagon with an ease that showed his strength. He helped her onto the bench seat and climbed up beside her, taking the reins of 2 sturdy horses. As they began the ride to his ranch, he pointed out various landmarks, the schoolhouse where a teacher from back east had just started teaching that spring, the church where Reverend Palmer held services every Sunday, the saloon that he admitted he rarely frequented anymore. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," he explained as they left the town behind. "It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine. Built it up from nothing over the past 8 years. Margaret studied him from the corner of her eye as he talked. He seemed kind, his voice gentle when he spoke about his land and his cattle. In his letters, he had been honest about why he wanted a wife. The loneliness of ranch life had worn on him, he had written, and he wanted to build a family, to have someone to share the work and the rewards with. She had appreciated his straightforwardness, which was why his honesty now made her feel even worse about her own deception. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill. It was larger than she had expected, a solid 2-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a chicken coop. The land stretched out in all directions, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree, with mountains rising in the purple distance. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, and she meant it. There was something honest about this place, something real that called to a part of her she had thought long buried. "It's home," Gideon said simply. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The interior of the house was neat and surprisingly well appointed. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged around it. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, and she could see a hallway that led to what must be bedrooms. "I had the women from town come help me get the place ready," Gideon admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "I'm not much for housekeeping on my own. Your room is upstairs, the one on the right. I thought you might want to rest before supper." Margaret felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." He carried her trunk upstairs, and she followed him to a bright, airy room with a large window that overlooked the property. A handmade quilt covered the iron-framed bed, and a simple dresser and washstand completed the furnishings. "I'll leave you to settle in," Gideon said. "Take your time. We'll have supper around sunset if that suits you." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Margaret sank onto the bed and let out a long breath. Her hands trembled as she opened her satchel and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a photograph, creased and worn from being handled so many times. It showed her standing with a man and a small boy, all three of them smiling at the camera. She traced her finger over the faces before wrapping it back up and hiding it at the bottom of her trunk, beneath her spare dresses and undergarments, Thomas and little William. Her husband and son, dead these past 2 years from cholera. She had told Gideon she was a widow in her letters, that much was true, but she had not told him about William. The pain of speaking about her son, of admitting that she had survived when he had not, was still too raw. And there was more she had not told him, secrets that felt like stones in her heart. That evening, she came downstairs to find Gideon in the kitchen, putting together a simple meal of stew and fresh bread. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "I hope you're hungry," he said. "I'm not the best cook, but I can manage the basics." They sat at the wooden table, and as they ate, Gideon asked her about her journey and her life in St. Louis. Margaret answered carefully, telling him about working as a seamstress after Thomas died, about the boarding house where she had lived, about her decision to come west when life in the city became too difficult to bear. All of it was true, but it was not the whole truth, and the omissions weighed on her conscience. "What made you choose Ash Fork?" she asked, redirecting the conversation. "It seems so remote." "That was part of the appeal," Gideon admitted. "After the war, I needed somewhere far from everything I'd known. I drifted for a few years, worked different ranches, saved my money. When I came through here and saw this land, something just felt right about it. You fought in the war," his expression grew distant. "I did. For the Union. Lost my whole family while I was gone. My parents and my younger sister caught typhoid in '63, came home in '65 to find strangers living in our house and graves in the churchyard." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, that's not pleasant supper conversation for your first night here." "No, please," Margaret said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I understand loss. Truly, I do." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, of understanding what it meant to carry grief. Gideon turned his hand over and squeezed her fingers gently before releasing them. "We'll have time to learn all about each other," he said. "No need to rush. I thought we might wait a few weeks before the wedding, give you time to be sure about all this. I know it's a big step, marrying a man you've only known through letters." Relief flooded through Margaret. "That's very kind of you." Over the next few days, Margaret began to settle into life on the ranch. She took over the cooking and housekeeping, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of domestic work. Gideon was respectful and patient, never pushing her, always giving her space while making it clear that he was glad she was there. He introduced her to his 2 ranch hands, Pete and Carlos, both older men who had worked for him for several years. They tipped their hats politely and treated her with careful courtesy. She learned the routines of the ranch, when the men went out to check on the cattle, when they mended fences, when they worked with the horses. Gideon had a small herd of about 200 head, which he explained was modest but manageable. He was building his operation slowly, carefully, not taking on more than he could handle. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Gideon told her about his plans for the ranch, about wanting to improve his breeding stock, about hoping to build a larger house someday if the ranch prospered. Margaret found herself relaxing in his presence, enjoying his quiet strength and steady nature. But the secret she carried felt like a wall between them, growing larger with each passing day. Every time he looked at her with those honest gray-blue eyes, she felt the weight of her deception more keenly. 2 weeks after her arrival, as they sat together after supper, Gideon reached across the table and took her hand. "Margaret, I want you to know that I'm happy you're here," he said. "These past 2 weeks have been the best I've had since I started this ranch. I know we agreed to wait before making things official, but I'm ready whenever you are. I think we could have a good life together." Her heart clenched painfully. "Gideon, there's something I need to tell you." His expression grew serious. "All right." She pulled her hand back and folded both hands in her lap, gathering her courage. "I told you I was a widow, and that's true, but I didn't tell you everything. My husband Thomas died of cholera 2 years ago, but he wasn't the only one I lost. We had a son, William. He was 4 years old when he died, just a few days after Thomas." Gideon's face softened with sympathy. "Margaret, I'm so sorry." "That's not all," she continued, her voice trembling now. She had to tell him everything, had to give him the chance to send her away if that was what he chose. "When Thomas got sick, I couldn't afford a doctor. I was working as a seamstress, but it was barely enough for rent and food. I tried everything I could, but without proper medicine, without help, they both just got worse and worse. And then William got sick too, and I had to watch them both die, knowing I couldn't save them." Tears streamed down her face now, the first time she had allowed herself to truly cry since those terrible days. "After they were gone, I couldn't stay in our rooms. Everything reminded me of them. I moved to the boarding house and tried to start over, but the city was full of memories. When I saw your advertisement for a mail-order bride, it seemed like a chance to escape, to start fresh somewhere far away from all that pain." She took a shuddering breath. "But I should have told you about William. I should have been honest from the beginning. I understand if you want me to leave. I can take the next stage back to St. Louis." Gideon stood and came around the table. He knelt beside her chair and took both her hands in his. "Margaret, look at me," he said gently. When she raised her tear-stained face, she saw only compassion in his eyes. "I don't want you to leave. What happened to your husband and your son was a tragedy, but it wasn't your fault. You did everything you could for them. And the fact that you carried that pain alone for 2 years, that you found the courage to come out here and try to build a new life, that takes real strength. You're not angry that I didn't tell you. I'm sad that you felt you had to carry that burden alone," he said. "But I'm not angry. Everyone has parts of their past that are hard to talk about. I should have told you more about my own struggles in my letters. I made it sound like starting this ranch was some grand adventure, but the truth is there were times I nearly gave up. Times when the loneliness felt like it would swallow me whole." He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "We're both survivors, Margaret. We've both known loss and grief. Maybe that's why we can understand each other. I don't need you to be perfect or to have a perfect past. I just need you to be honest with me from now on, and I promise to do the same with you." Something broke open in Margaret's chest, a knot of fear and guilt that had been there for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. She looked at this man kneeling before her, offering her acceptance and understanding when she had expected rejection, and felt something new bloom in its place, hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "You can't know what that means to me." "I think I do," he said softly. He stood and helped her to her feet. "Why don't we go for a walk? The moon's nearly full tonight and I'd like to show you something." They walked out into the clear desert night, the air cooling rapidly after the heat of the day. Gideon led her to a small rise behind the house where they could see the whole ranch spread out before them, silver touched by moonlight. The stars overhead were more numerous than she had ever seen, a brilliant scatter of light across the dark sky. "This is where I come when I need to think," Gideon said. "Or when I need to remember that I'm part of something bigger than my own troubles. Looking at all those stars, knowing they've been there long before I was born and will be there long after I'm gone, it puts things in perspective." Margaret stood beside him, feeling the vastness of the sky and the land, and for the first time since William's death, she felt a sense of peace beginning to settle over her. The pain was still there, would always be there, but maybe Gideon was right. Maybe they could help each other carry their burdens. "I'd like to go ahead with the wedding," she said quietly, "if you still want to." He turned to her, his face serious in the moonlight. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel rushed." "I'm sure. You've shown me more kindness in these 2 weeks than I dared hope for. I want to build a life here with you, Gideon. I want to try." He smiled then, a genuine expression of joy that transformed his usually serious face. "Then we'll talk to Reverend Palmer on Sunday. We can set a date for a few weeks out, give you time to prepare if you want." "I don't need anything fancy," Margaret said. "Just a simple ceremony." "Simple suits me fine," Gideon agreed. He offered her his arm and they walked back to the house together under the watchful stars. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The women of Ash Fork, led by Sarah Chen, the wife of the man who owned the general store, welcomed Margaret warmly and helped her prepare for the wedding. They brought fabric for a new dress, shared recipes and advice, and told her about life in the small frontier town. Margaret found herself beginning to build friendships for the first time since leaving St. Louis. Sarah became a particular friend. She was a practical woman in her mid-30s who had come from San Francisco to marry Robert Chen 10 years earlier. "I was a mail-order bride too," she confided to Margaret as they worked on the wedding dress together. "I know how strange and scary it can be, leaving everything you know to marry a stranger. But Robert turned out to be the best man I could have hoped for. I think you found the same with Gideon. He's a good man, honest and hardworking. He'll treat you right." The wedding took place on a Sunday morning in late September. The small church was filled with most of the town's residents, all curious to meet Gideon's bride and celebrate the occasion. Margaret wore the simple white dress Sarah had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Gideon had picked that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward where he stood waiting, looking handsome in his best suit, she felt her heart swell with an emotion she had not expected to feel again. Genuine affection, perhaps even the beginning of love. Reverend Palmer conducted the ceremony with warmth and dignity. When it came time for the vows, Gideon took her hands and spoke his promises in a steady, clear voice. Margaret repeated her own vows, meaning every word. And when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. The town threw a celebration at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Margaret found herself swept up in the festivities, dancing with Gideon and then with other men from town as was customary, while Gideon danced with the other wives. It was a joyful afternoon, full of laughter and goodwill, and Margaret felt herself truly beginning to believe in the possibility of happiness again. As the sun began to set, they returned to the ranch. Pete and Carlos had made themselves scarce for the evening, staying in town to give the newlyweds privacy. Gideon helped Margaret down from the wagon, and they stood together in the doorway of the house, the threshold of their new life together. "I know this started as an arrangement," Gideon said, his voice low and serious. "But I want you to know that I meant every word of those vows. I'm committed to making this marriage work, to building a life with you." "So am I," Margaret said. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the scar above his eyebrow. "I'm grateful for your patience, for your understanding. I know I'm still healing, still learning how to open my heart again after everything that's happened." "We'll heal together," he said. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "We have all the time in the world." That night, they came together as husband and wife. Gideon was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Margaret found herself responding to his touch, to the tenderness he showed her, and when they finally joined together, it felt like a promise, a new beginning built on honesty and mutual respect. In the weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Margaret took pride in making the house a true home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting an herb garden near the kitchen door, organizing and improving the domestic side of ranch life. Gideon included her in decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinions and ideas. They developed a partnership that went beyond the traditional roles of husband and wife, becoming true companions who relied on each other. As autumn turned to winter, Margaret found herself falling in love with her husband. It was not the passionate, whirlwind romance of her youth with Thomas. This was something deeper and steadier, built on trust and shared experience. She loved the way Gideon's face lit up when he talked about his dreams for the ranch, the way he always made sure she had enough firewood before the cold nights, the way he listened when she talked about her sewing projects or her ideas for expanding the garden in spring. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire after supper, Margaret found the courage to share more of her past with him. She retrieved the photograph from her trunk and brought it downstairs, sitting beside Gideon on the sofa. "I want to show you something," she said, handing him the photograph. Gideon studied it carefully, his expression gentle. "You were so young." 20 when that was taken," Margaret said. "Thomas was 22 and William had just turned 3. We were happy then. Poor but happy. Thomas worked in a factory and I took in sewing. We had dreams of saving enough to buy a little shop someday." "Tell me about William," Gideon said softly. "What was he like?" No one had asked her that before. People had offered condolences, had changed the subject when her son came up, had treated his death as something too painful to discuss. But Gideon was asking her to remember, to share the good memories along with the grief. "He was full of energy," Margaret said, a smile touching her lips despite the tears in her eyes. "Always running, always into everything. He loved stories, would beg me to read to him every night. And he had this laugh, this wonderful bubbling laugh that made everyone around him smile." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so afraid I would forget what he sounded like, what he looked like. Sometimes I panic because I can't quite remember the exact shade of his eyes or the way he smelled after his bath." Gideon pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "The fear of forgetting is natural. But the love you had for him, the joy he brought you, that's still real. That's still part of who you are." They sat together in the firelight, and Margaret found herself sharing stories about William, about the funny things he used to say, about his favorite toy, a carved wooden horse that Thomas had made for him. Gideon listened to all of it, never interrupting, just holding her and letting her remember. "Thank you for asking," Margaret said when she had finally run out of words. No one else wanted to hear about him. They thought it would upset me too much. You should be able to talk about him, Gideon said. He was your son. He'll always be part of your story, part of who you are. I'm honored that you trust me enough to share these memories with me. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. The last walls between them came down, and Margaret found herself able to love Gideon fully, without reservation. She no longer felt like she was betraying Thomas's memory by opening her heart to another man. Instead, she understood that the capacity to love was not finite, that having loved and lost did not mean she could never love again. Winter on the ranch was beautiful in its own harsh way. Snow occasionally dusted the desert landscape, transforming it into something otherworldly. The work of the ranch continued, with cattle to feed and water, fences to check, and endless repairs to make. Margaret learned to help with some of the outdoor work, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs, tending to the horses when Gideon was out on the range. One particularly cold morning in January, she woke to find Gideon already gone from their bed. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find him in the kitchen, looking worried. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Carlos just came in from checking the south pasture. There's a cow down there about to calve, but she's having trouble. I need to go help, but it's going to be a long, cold day. I might not be back until after dark." "I'll pack you some food and coffee," Margaret said, already moving to the stove. "And I'll keep supper warm for whenever you get back." He caught her hand as she passed and pulled her close for a quick kiss. "What did I do to deserve you? You took a chance on a widow with secrets," she said, smiling up at him. "Now go save that cow and her calf." Gideon and Carlos were gone all day. Margaret kept herself busy with indoor chores, but as darkness fell and the temperature dropped even further, she began to worry. She built up the fire and kept the stew simmering, watching the window for any sign of their return. It was nearly 9 o'clock when she finally heard the sound of horses. She rushed to the door to find Gideon and Carlos both covered in mud and looking exhausted, but grinning. "We got her through it," Gideon announced. "Fine, healthy bull calf. Mother and baby are both doing well." "Get in here and get warm," Margaret ordered, already pouring hot water for them to wash up. "Both of you, Carlos, you're staying for supper. I won't hear any arguments." Over the meal, the two men told her about the difficult birth, how they had to help turn the calf, how they had stayed with the mother for hours to make sure she was strong enough to care for her baby. Margaret listened, marveling at their dedication, at the way they cared for their animals like they were family. After Carlos headed to the bunkhouse, Margaret helped Gideon into bed. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow, worn out from the long day. She lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, and felt a surge of love so strong it almost frightened her. This man, this life, this second chance at happiness, it was more than she had dared hope for. Spring arrived with a burst of color as wildflowers bloomed across the desert landscape. Margaret's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The ranch was doing well, with several new calves born healthy and strong. Gideon talked about buying more breeding stock, about expanding their operation. One morning in early May, Margaret woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before being violently sick. Gideon was immediately concerned, wanting to ride into town for the doctor, but Margaret stopped him. "I don't think I'm ill," she said carefully. "I think I might be expecting." Gideon's eyes went wide. "A baby, are you sure?" "Not completely, but the signs are there," Margaret said. "I should know for certain in a few more weeks." A smile spread across Gideon's face, pure joy lighting up his features. He swept her into his arms and spun her around before remembering her condition and setting her down gently. "This is wonderful news. Are you happy about it? Margaret realized that she was. The thought of having another child had terrified her after losing William, but now, with Gideon beside her with a stable home and a good future ahead of them, she felt ready. Yes, she said. I'm happy. A little scared, but happy. I'll take care of you, Gideon promised. Both of you. I'll make sure you have everything you need. As the weeks passed and her pregnancy became certain, Gideon was true to his word. He insisted she rest more, took on extra household chores himself, and treated her like she was made of glass. Margaret finally had to put her foot down when he tried to prohibit her from her garden work. I'm pregnant, not an invalid, she said firmly. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work. I'll be careful, but I won't spend the next 7 months sitting idle. Sarah and the other women in town were excited about the baby, offering advice and help. Sarah, who had raised 3 children of her own, was particularly helpful, calming Margaret's fears and sharing her own experiences. The fear never completely goes away, Sarah admitted one afternoon as they worked on baby clothes together. Especially after you've lost a child. But you can't let the fear stop you from loving this new baby with your whole heart. Each child is different, each one a gift. What if something goes wrong? Margaret voiced her deepest worry. What if I lose this baby too? Then you'll grieve, and Gideon will be there to help you through it, Sarah said gently. But you can't live your life waiting for tragedy. This baby has every chance of being healthy and strong. You're in a good situation now, with a husband who loves you, a comfortable home, and access to medical care. That's more than many women have. Margaret took comfort in Sarah's words and in Gideon's unwavering support. As summer arrived and her belly began to swell with new life, she found herself growing excited about the future. She and Gideon spent evenings discussing names and making plans for the nursery. Gideon built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving it with care and pride. One hot August evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Gideon took her hand. I want you to know something, he said seriously. This baby, whether it's a boy or a girl, will be loved completely, but that doesn't mean William is forgotten or replaced. He'll always be part of our family story, your first son, and I'll make sure this child knows about their brother. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. How did I get so lucky to find you? I think we found each other, Gideon said. 2 broken people who learned how to be whole again together. The baby arrived in late October after a long but uncomplicated labor. Dr. Matthews, who had ridden out from town, declared it a textbook birth. Gideon stayed with Margaret throughout, holding her hand and encouraging her, refusing to be sent away despite the doctor's suggestion that it was no place for a man. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Dr. Matthews announced, "It's a boy, a healthy baby boy." Gideon cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. When the doctor placed the clean, swaddled baby in Margaret's arms, she looked down at her son and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. He had Gideon's dark hair and a pair of lungs that made his feelings known loudly. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world. What should we name him?" Gideon asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around both of them. They had discussed many names over the past months, but now, looking at their son, Margaret knew what felt right. "I'd like to call him Thomas, after my first husband, with Gideon as his middle name, if that's all right with you. Thomas Gideon Ashworth." Gideon's eyes were wet with tears. "I'd be honored. Thomas it is." In the days that followed, Margaret marveled at how naturally they adjusted to having a baby in the house. Gideon was a devoted father, taking to his new role with enthusiasm. He would walk the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night, singing old songs in a soft, rumbling voice. He changed diapers without complaint and took pride in every small accomplishment: the first smile, the first time Thomas grasped his finger, the way the baby's eyes would follow him around the room. Margaret found that loving Thomas did not diminish her love for William. Instead, it helped heal the ragged wound that his death had left. She could think of William now without the crushing weight of guilt, could remember the joy he had brought to her life alongside the sorrow of losing him. She told Thomas stories about his brother as he grew, wanting him to know about the boy who had come before him. The ranch continued to prosper. With the careful management Gideon had always practiced, and the good fortune of several mild winters, the herd grew. By the time Thomas was 2 years old, toddling around the house and chattering constantly, Gideon had expanded the operation significantly. He hired 2 more hands and built a larger barn. Margaret had also grown the domestic side of the ranch. Her garden produced enough vegetables to sell in town, and she had started raising chickens in larger numbers, selling eggs and occasionally a hen. The extra income helped, but more than that, she enjoyed the work, enjoyed feeling like a full partner in their enterprise. On Thomas's 2nd birthday, they threw a party at the ranch, inviting friends from town and neighboring ranches. It was a beautiful October day, warm and clear, and children ran around the yard playing while the adults talked and laughed. As Margaret watched Gideon chase Thomas around the yard, both of them laughing, she felt Sarah come to stand beside her. "You look happy," Sarah observed. "I am," Margaret said, "more than I ever thought possible. There were times, after I lost William and Thomas, my first Thomas, when I thought I would never be happy again. When I thought the rest of my life would just be going through the motions. But this, all of this, it's more than I dreamed of." "You deserve it," Sarah said warmly. "Both of you do. You took a chance on each other and it paid off." That night, after all the guests had gone home and Thomas was asleep in his bed, Margaret and Gideon sat on the porch in the cool evening air. "Happy?" Gideon asked, pulling her close. "Very," Margaret said. "Are you?" "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," he said. "When I sent that advertisement for a mail-order bride, I was hoping for companionship, maybe someone to help with the ranch. I never expected to find true love. I never expected to find you." "I almost didn't come," Margaret admitted. "I was so scared. Scared of trusting someone new, scared of being rejected if you learned the truth about my past, scared of loving and losing again." "What made you take the chance?" "Your letters," she said. "They were honest and kind. You didn't try to pretend life out here would be easy, but you also made it clear you were looking for a true partnership. And I thought maybe this man would understand. Maybe he would accept me as I am." "And I did," Gideon said. "I do. Your past, your losses, they're part of what made you who you are. I love all of you, Margaret, including the broken parts you thought you had to hide." She turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that simple gesture. When they finally pulled apart, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of wind through the juniper trees. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. When Thomas was 4, Margaret gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She had Margaret's light brown hair and Gideon's gray-blue eyes, and she was a sunny, cheerful child from the start. 2 years after Grace came another daughter, Helen, who had dark curls and a stubborn streak that reminded Margaret of William. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Gideon's reputation as an honest dealer and a skilled rancher spread throughout the territory. He served on the town council for several years and helped establish a proper school in Ash Fork. Margaret became known for her charitable work, organizing relief efforts when drought struck neighboring ranches and helping new arrivals to the area get established. They faced difficulties, too. A harsh winter in 1885 killed several head of cattle. Grace fell seriously ill with pneumonia when she was 6, and for a terrifying week, Margaret relived the nightmare of watching a child suffer while feeling helpless. But this time, with access to a good doctor and proper medicine, Grace recovered fully. A wildfire swept across part of their range one hot summer, and they lost valuable grazing land. Though the house and buildings were spared through all of it, Margaret and Gideon faced each challenge together. Their love deepened with each passing year, becoming the bedrock on which their entire lives were built. They learned each other's rhythms, anticipated each other's needs, and found joy in the simple moments of daily life together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon surprised Margaret with a trip to Flagstaff, leaving the children with Sarah and Robert. It was the first time they had been alone together since Thomas was born, and they spent 3 glorious days exploring the town, eating in restaurants and staying in a real hotel. On their last evening, as they walked through the town in the cool mountain air, Gideon stopped and turned to face her. "I want to thank you," he said. "For what? For taking a chance on me, for coming all this way to marry a stranger, for building this life with me, for giving me a family when I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone." He took both her hands in his. "These past 10 years have been the best of my life. You and the children, you're everything I never knew I needed." "You saved me," Margaret said simply. "When I came here, I was running from my past, from my grief, from myself. I didn't expect to find healing or love or happiness. But you gave me all of that. You accepted me completely, secrets and all, and you helped me learn that it was okay to live again, to love again." They stood there on the darkening street, holding each other, 2 people who had found their way out of loneliness and loss into a love that had surprised them both with its depth and strength. The children grew. Thomas showed an early aptitude for ranching, following his father everywhere and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Grace was the scholar of the family, always with her nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Helen was the wild one, climbing trees and riding horses and generally keeping her parents on their toes. Margaret made sure all 3 children knew about their heritage. She told them about their namesake, Thomas, and about William, the brother who had died before they were born. She wanted them to understand that their family was built on both joy and sorrow, that the capacity to love deeply sometimes meant risking deep pain, but that it was always worth it. Gideon taught the children about the land, about respecting nature and working hard and treating everyone with fairness. He became known throughout the territory as a man of integrity, someone whose word was his bond. The ranch became one of the most successful in the area, not because Gideon was ruthless or lucky, but because he was smart, hardworking, and ethical. In 1890, when Thomas was 13, Gideon sat him down for a serious conversation. "Son, someday this ranch will be yours," he said. "You and your sisters will inherit everything your mother and I have built, but I want you to understand something. This land, these cattle, this house, they're important, but they're not the most valuable thing we're leaving you." "What is?" Thomas asked. "The knowledge of what real love looks like," Gideon said. "Your mother and I both came to this marriage carrying heavy burdens. We both knew what it was like to lose everything. But we chose to trust each other, to be honest with each other, to build something together. That's the real legacy I want to leave you, the understanding that love is a choice you make every day, a commitment to stand by someone through good times and bad." Thomas thought about this seriously, as he thought about most things. "Is that why you and Ma never fight? Because you choose not to?" Gideon laughed. "Oh, we fight sometimes. Your mother has strong opinions and so do I, but we fight fair and we always work things out. The key is respect. I respect your mother as my equal partner in this marriage and this ranch. She's not just my wife, she's my best friend." Those lessons stuck with Thomas and his sisters. They grew up understanding that a good marriage was built on mutual respect, honesty, and commitment, and that love was both a feeling and a choice. As the children grew older and more independent, Margaret and Gideon found themselves with more time together. They would often ride out to check on the herd together, spending hours in each other's company, talking about everything and nothing. They grew old together gradually, silver threading through their hair, lines appearing around their eyes, but their love never diminished. On a spring evening in 1895, 17 years after Margaret had stepped off that stagecoach in Ash Fork, she and Gideon sat on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas, now 16, was out with the hands learning the business. The girls were inside, supposedly doing homework but probably gossiping about the boys in town. "You ever think about how different your life could have been?" Gideon asked. "If you hadn't answered my advertisement, if you'd stayed in St. Louis," Margaret considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I can't really imagine it anymore. That life, that version of me, feels like someone else's story. This is who I am now. Your wife, mother to our children, a rancher's partner, and I love who I've become." "You still think about them, Thomas and William, always," Margaret said, "but not with the same crushing grief I used to feel. Now I can remember them with love and gratitude for the time we had together. And I believe that if Thomas could see me now, he would be happy that I found love again, that I didn't spend the rest of my life mourning." "I think about my family sometimes too," Gideon said. "My parents and my sister. I used to feel guilty that I was happy when they were gone. But I've come to understand that they would have wanted me to live fully, to build a family, to find joy." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. After all these years, they still found peace in each other's presence, still felt that spark of love that had grown from initial attraction to deep, abiding affection, to the kind of love that transcended words. The following year brought a major change to Ash Fork and the surrounding area. The railroad, which had been pushing westward, finally reached their town. It brought new opportunities and new challenges. The ranch could now ship cattle to markets in California and back east more easily, which meant better prices. But it also brought an influx of new settlers, changing the character of the small frontier town they had known. Gideon was elected to help negotiate right-of-way agreements with the railroad, a position that reflected the respect he had earned in the community. Margaret worked with Sarah and other women to establish a proper hospital in town, raising funds and organizing volunteer nurses. Their children thrived in this changing world. Thomas, at 17, was already taking on more responsibility at the ranch, and Gideon began seriously preparing him to eventually take over. Grace, at 13, was teaching younger children at the school, her dream of becoming a teacher already taking shape. Helen, at 11, had developed a surprising talent for working with horses, able to gentle even the most stubborn animals. One evening, as Margaret watched her 3 children laughing together over supper, she felt Gideon's hand find hers under the table. She looked over at him and saw her own contentment reflected in his eyes. They had built something wonderful together, a family, a home, a legacy of love. The years continued to pass, bringing the turn of the century and all the changes that came with it. The wild frontier they had known was gradually being tamed, becoming more civilized with each passing year. But the ranch remained a constant, a piece of the Old West preserved through their hard work and dedication. Thomas married at 21, bringing home a sweet-natured young woman named Elizabeth from Flagstaff. They moved into the house Gideon had built for them on the eastern edge of the property, and within a year, Margaret became a grandmother for the first time when Elizabeth gave birth to a boy they named James. Holding her grandson for the first time, Margaret was overwhelmed with emotion. She thought of William, who would have been in his 30s now if he had lived, who might have had children of his own. But the grief that thought brought was gentle now, mixed with gratitude for the life she had lived, for the children she had raised, for this new generation she was privileged to see. "What are you thinking?" Gideon asked softly, coming to stand beside her as she rocked little James. "That life is strange and precious," Margaret said. "That sorrow and joy are so intertwined we can barely separate them, that I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here." Grace followed her dream and became a teacher, taking a position at the school in Flagstaff. She met a young lawyer there, a serious but kind man named David, and they married when she was 20. Helen surprised everyone by falling in love with Pete's nephew, Miguel, who had come to work on the ranch when he was 18. Despite initial concerns about their age difference, he was 6 years older. It was clear they shared a deep love and mutual respect. They married when Helen was 19 and Miguel was 25, and they built a house on the western edge of the property. By 1905, Gideon and Margaret found themselves empty nesters for the first time since Thomas was born. The ranch was effectively run by Thomas now, though Gideon still helped and advised. They had 6 grandchildren between their 3 children, with more on the way, and the ranch was thriving under Thomas's leadership. One morning, Margaret woke to find Gideon already up, standing at the window looking out at the land he had built his life on. "What are you thinking about so early?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "About how blessed I am," he said, putting his arm around her. "I'm 52 years old, Margaret. When I was young, I never imagined I would live to this age, never mind that I would have everything I have now. A wife I love more with each passing year, 3 wonderful children, grandchildren, a successful ranch, good friends. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We built it together," Margaret reminded him. "Every bit of it." "That's what makes it so sweet," Gideon agreed. "Knowing that we started with nothing but hope and hard work, and somehow turned it into all this." They stood together watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of coral and gold, the same sky they had watched together for 27 years, and marveled at how far they had come. That afternoon, they rode out together to their favorite spot, the hill behind the original house where Gideon had first taken her that moonlit night so many years ago. The property had expanded significantly since then, but they still owned this piece, still came here when they needed to think or talk or simply be together. "You remember the first time we came here?" Gideon asked as they sat on the hillside, looking out over the land. "I remember everything about those early days," Margaret said. "I was so scared, so certain you would reject me when you learned the truth, and you were so patient, so kind." "I was scared too," Gideon admitted. "Terrified that you would realize you had made a mistake, that you would get back on that stagecoach and leave me alone again." "Never," Margaret said firmly. "From the moment you told me you accepted me, secrets and all, I was yours. I just had to learn to accept that I deserved happiness again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Gideon spoke again. "I want to thank you for something." "What's that?" "For telling me about William. For trusting me with that pain. I know it wasn't easy, but it meant everything that you shared that with me. And watching you with our children, with our grandchildren, seeing you love them so fully while still honoring William's memory, it's taught me so much about the capacity of the human heart." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. You taught me that it was possible to love again, that my heart was big enough to hold all of it, the past and the present, the sorrow and the joy. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they made their way back to the house. The next generation was having dinner there tonight. All their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday supper, a tradition they had established years ago. The house was full of noise and laughter when they arrived. Grandchildren ran through the rooms, their children's voices mixed in conversation and good-natured argument, and the smell of roasting meat and baking bread filled the air. Margaret and Gideon stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. "This is what we built," Gideon said quietly. "This love, this family. Our legacy," Margaret agreed. They joined the chaos, Gideon immediately surrounded by grandchildren demanding his attention, Margaret heading to the kitchen to help Elizabeth and Helen with the final preparations. Grace was there too, visiting from Flagstaff with her family for the weekend. As they all sat down to eat, 3 generations gathered around the large table Gideon had built when Thomas was small. Margaret looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world. Her children, grown now with families of their own, but still her babies in so many ways. Her grandchildren, with their bright eyes and endless energy. And Gideon, her partner through everything, sitting at the head of the table with a grandchild on his lap, looking happier than she had ever seen him. After dinner, as the women cleaned up and the men took the children outside to enjoy the last light of day, Grace came to stand beside Margaret at the sink. "Ma, can I ask you something?" Grace said. "Of course, sweetheart. How did you know that Pa was the right one? When you came here as a mail-order bride, not knowing him at all, how did you know it would work out?" Margaret thought about the question carefully. "I didn't know," she admitted. "I hoped, but I didn't know. What I did know was that he was honest in his letters, that he seemed like a good man, and that I needed to take a chance on something new. And when I got here and told him the truth about my past, about the son I had lost, he didn't judge me or turn me away. He accepted all of me, and that's when I knew I could trust him with my heart. I love David," Grace said, "but sometimes marriage is hard. We're so different in so many ways." "Marriage is hard," Margaret agreed. "It's a choice you make every day to love that person, to work through the difficulties instead of walking away. Your father and I have had our struggles over the years, but we always come back to our commitment to each other, to the life we're building together. That's what matters." Grace hugged her mother. "Thank you. You and Pa, you've shown us what love should look like. I just wanted you to know that." After everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Margaret and Gideon prepared for bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Gideon pulled her close. "I love you, Margaret Ashworth," he said, "more than words can express." "And I love you, Gideon," she replied. "Thank you for seeing past the broken parts to the woman I could become." "You were never broken," he said softly, "just wounded, and wounds heal given time and love." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms as they had for 27 years, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would endure. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, and eventually even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch remained successful under Thomas's management, and he proved himself to be as skilled and ethical as his father. Grace's children followed in her footsteps, becoming teachers and lawyers, continuing her legacy of education and service. Helen and Miguel's children were natural ranchers, as comfortable on horseback as they were on foot. Gideon and Margaret settled into old age with Grace, still active but slowing down, content to let the younger generation take the lead while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They spent their days tending Margaret's garden, now quite extensive, taking gentle rides around the property, and watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, their family threw them a huge celebration. The ranch was filled with family and friends, people coming from all over the territory to celebrate the couple who had become something of a legend in the area. Their love story, the mail-order bride who had arrived with secrets and the rancher who had loved her anyway, had inspired many over the years. At the celebration, Thomas stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "You taught us that love is more than just a feeling. It's a commitment, a choice, a partnership. You showed us that honesty and acceptance are the foundation of a strong marriage. And you proved that taking a chance on love, even when you're scared, even when you've been hurt before, is always worth it. Thank you for the example you've set and the family you've built. We love you both." As everyone drank to the toast, Margaret felt tears running down her face. Gideon, sitting beside her, took her hand and raised it to his lips. 40 years, he said softly, just for her. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Margaret said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." They danced that night, slowly and carefully given their age, but with the same love that had brought them together 4 decades earlier. Their children and grandchildren watched with tears in their eyes, seeing the devotion that still shone between them after all these years. As the sun set on their 40th anniversary, Margaret and Gideon stood once more on their favorite hill, looking out over the land they had built together. The ranch stretched out before them, testament to their hard work and dedication. But more important than any of that was the love they had built, a love that had healed old wounds, created new joy, and would echo through the generations to come. "You have any regrets?" Gideon asked. Margaret thought about the question, truly considered it. "Only that I didn't have more time with William and my first Thomas," she said. "But I don't regret the path that brought me here. The grief I carried, it made me who I am. And who I am is someone who knows how precious love is, how fragile life can be, and how important it is to cherish every moment we have." "I used to regret the years I spent alone," Gideon said. "All that time after the war, drifting without purpose. But now I see that I needed those years to become the man who could love you the way you deserve to be loved. Everything in our lives, the good and the bad, led us to each other." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky above them, they made their way back to the house one last time, hand in hand. Two people who had taken a chance on love and found more than they had ever dared to dream. Their secret had been that Margaret had arrived wounded and afraid, carrying the weight of unspoken grief. But Gideon had loved her anyway, and in doing so, had helped her heal. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone.